Hello, everyone. If we are just going to ask you to please mute yourselves if you are not asking a question today. So welcome to our lovely panel on custody and visitation. We have some great New York City judges, all in Kings County, which is in Brooklyn. And they are so great to join us during their lunch hour today. And we have our moderator, Jamie Nelson, who is a court attorney for Judge Waxberg, who is on the panel today. So she will be asking the questions. And of course, we hopefully will also have an opportunity at the end for some Q&A. But we ask you to please just keep yourself on mute until we get to that portion. So without further ado, Jamie, I'll let you take it away.
Go ahead. Hey, again, thank you, judges, for joining us this afternoon. I know the students are probably very excited to have you all here. Haya, did you get a chance to send everybody's bio out? Did the students know about
I did. Okay. Yeah, in the interest
All right, cool.
of time, your bios were all circulated so that you don't have to go into extensive background and just so that everyone has an opportunity to have read about all of you, how you might have gotten to where you're at today. So yes, your bios were circulated, and thank you so much for sending.
Okay, great. So I know Hyatt and I had actually discussed some of these questions before coming in today. And I think that the first one that she really wanted to address was, did you always want to be a judge? And I'm kind of curious who might be interested in answering that first. I mean, Judge Vargas, I feel like you've kind of had the diverse judging experience, correct?
Yes, I did. Oh,
I'm sorry to call you out.
that's fine. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to have you all here. So, yes, so no, I didn't. I didn't want to become a judge at the beginning. I have always, some of the pathways to becoming a judge is that you can have a clerkship. And I advise all of you to please try to get a clerkship because it's a very good experience right at the beginning of your career. So I did a clerkship for several years. And as I was with my judge, I'm like looking at him like, I can do this better than you can, or something to that effect. I can do it too. So that's how I was like, oh, so maybe I should start that process. It's a long process. In New York State, we have different ways of becoming a judge. It can either be through nomination of the political party or through application nomination by a body, by the government. So like family court judges in New York City are appointed by the mayor of New York City. So you have to start the process early and get involved in politics if you are, because that's a very crucial part of becoming a judge. And that's what I did at the beginning.
And I know Judge Friedewitzer, you had a different pathway, correct, to the judgeship?
So when I started out after law school, I knew that what I wanted to do was I wanted to help children. That was what I left thinking. And I was working part-time for someone after school, and they brought me to family court. And I got to see about being, at the time it was called law guardian for children, but now it's the attorney for the child. And I was very much interested in that. And so what I ended up doing was I became an assigned counsel. So I started out as an assigned counsel, working for the assigned counsel program in Queens. And from there, I was assigned to represent children in custody cases, in addition to everything else that was in family court. I was also able to be assigned from the Supreme Court in Queens. So I ran back and forth between the family court and the Supreme Court. And at one point, I was asked by one of the family court judges to be her court attorney. And so I left from representing the children then to working for a judge in family court. And then ultimately, I just kind of kept moving. I feel as if I've done most of the jobs in family court. I then went on to be, at the time it was called a hearing examiner, but now it's a support magistrate. I did not do straight child support at the time, though. It was mostly regarding, at the time we had a public assistance part, so it was really determining orders of affiliation that people were asking to set aside. So those who were fathers, whether they were declared fathers by the court or whether they signed, the way that you can become a father in New York State at least is you can, in order to get on the birth certificate, you have to sign an acknowledgement of paternity. So once you sign an acknowledgement of paternity, that makes you the legal father. So there are a lot of people who sign them, but then want to have DNA tests after. So what I was assigned to do is really deal with all of the issues with regards to people who did not take the DNA test and either agreed in the court to become a father and then had some reservations or signed an acknowledgement of paternity in the hospital. Because what happens when you are on public assistance is you assign your rights to collect child support to the Department of Social Services. So the Department of Social Services starts filing petitions for support, and people realize that they have made themselves a legal father and now are not sure if they are really the father. So that's what I was doing for a long time. I then worked for the administrative judge for all the city family courts. I was his principal court attorney. And then I was involved in education and training of the referees and the judges and the court attorneys. When that judge retired, then I went back to being what's now known as a support magistrate, and I was doing child support. I'm tired actually listening. After that, I was a referee in Queens Supreme Court, and there, because of my family court backgrounds, what I did was when you start a divorce and it's contested, the first conference that you schedule before the court is called a preliminary conference. So there were, at the time, there were 4 judges, there were 3, and then there were 4 matrimonial judges. And the way that it was set up was that I conducted all the preliminary conferences for all 4 judges. So before they got to the judges, they went through me. And a lot of it had to do with issuing temporary orders of child support, temporary orders of visitation. So then I was doing everything that I had done in family court, just all at the same time. And then the case would go on. I would set those orders, and then the case would then continue with the matrimonial judge. I think to answer the actual question, did I always want to become a judge? I think what I realized along the way was what your authority and boundaries were with each job that I had. And I think for me, when I was representing children, I was trying to convince the judges of things that I wanted them to do, I realized that I had a limitation. And then when I was a court attorney, I can advise a judge what I think is right, but ultimately it's the judge that makes that decision. And then when I was a support magistrate and a referee, as referee Waldire will let you know, you're still limited. You think you can, you make rulings, you make determinations, you make these decisions, but there's always just like that piece that you don't have. So for me, at that point, having been in the system for so long, realizing that there were things that I wanted to do, that's when I continued on to be able to make those more decisions. Although you still are limited, we're still limited a lot by a lot of the things that we can do, but that gave me the ability to do more that I wanted to do. Sorry for that very long answer.
That's okay. That's okay. I was going to move on to Judge Waxberg, because I know Judge Friedewitzer said she began working with as an attorney for the child, and Judge Waxberg, can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up becoming a judge?
You're muted.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie. When I went to law school, I went because I wanted to be an advocate for children. That's really what I wanted to do. And so when I got out, I fairly soon got a job with legal aid representing children. I was doing it as an appellate lawyer because I like to write. So I did it as an appellate lawyer for many years, and then I ran the appeals unit of legal aid that represents children. So I did that for a very long time, and I don't think I ever really thought about being a judge until, maybe like 10 days before I, decided to put my papers in, when somebody said, why don't you think about being a judge? And I thought, oh, if I did that, I could do some of the things that I keep asking judges to do all the time. So I did, as Judge Vargas was saying, there are different ways to becoming judges in New York. Family court judges, you have to go through this very long process where you appear before a lot of different committees, and then the mayor has to appoint you. And it's I don't think any of the processes are very pleasant, but this is very involved. So anyway, I did that, and then I became a judge, and I found that I really love it. So sometimes you just don't know what life is going to bring you. So
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to move on to Val. So Val, you're not a judge, but can you tell us a little bit about the role you play in family court and how you got there? You're muted too.
Sorry about that. I think the hardest part of my job is explaining to anyone what my job is, because I constantly have to tell them I'm a referee, and they say like sports, and I say no, totally different. So basically, I started as an attorney for the Administration for Children's Services. I started doing that right out of law school. Unlike the other people here, I legitimately had no idea what I wanted to do when I started law school. So if you don't, that's fine. You'll get there. And I got a job at ACS, representing the city, filing cases against, in terms of abuse and neglect, where there's allegations that children have been abused and neglected. I worked there for a little over 3 years, and like many of the judges here, I got a job working for a judge in family court. We started together in the Bronx, and then we moved together to Brooklyn, and I worked for her for over 7 years, and it is truly an amazing experience. She is still my go-to for most questions I have today. I absolutely echo what Judge Vargas said, in that it's a really wonderful experience, and it gives you so much real world knowledge in terms of what you get to do, and in terms of writing, and in terms of just getting to know everyone. And it's a phenomenal experience. You guys are probably super young, but I refer to her as Mr. Miyagi, because she used to have me do all of these different things when I was working for her, and I never understood why I had to do them. And then I got my current job, and I was like, oh my God, she was preparing me for this. So it's a really great experience. I applied for a job as a referee, which is, I get to hear and determine cases. I work with litigants the same way a judge does, but in order for parties to have their case heard by me, they have to consent. So they would absolutely have the right to say, you know what, we don't want to appear in front of you. We would prefer to go see a judge, and then they'll get to go see Judge Friederwitzer because she's my paired judge. So, but if they do consent, and I would say 99% of the time they do, then we go through the exact same things that they would go through as a judge, and the appeals process is the same. Meaning if they're not happy at the end of the day with the decision, they appeal to the second department the same way they would if they were with one of the judges that's also here today. And the application is different because I simply applied for the job. It's not the laborious and time-consuming and stressful procedure that is the being appointed as a judge, but it is a phenomenal job, and I didn't realize it when I started, but I truly love working in family court. It is an amazing experience. This is not what I thought I was going to do when I went into law school. It is absolutely phenomenally rewarding. And of all of my friends that I graduated with, from law school, I'm in the less common group of people that is truly, truly happy doing their job. And I urge you to get into something that you enjoy. because you're going to be doing it for a long time and it's important, and you really want to have that quality of life, work-life balance. And if you hate your job, you're going to be really miserable. So it's great to try to find something that you're passionate about.
Great, thank you. So I have another question, and I don't want everyone to, I mean, everyone can jump on this, I suppose. What do you wish, if you could go back in time, that you could tell your newly minted baby lawyer self? The day you got to sign the big book in the appellate division, what do you wish, what advice do you wish you could give yourself? Judge Vargas, you're on my screen, so you're it.
I think that what I would say to myself is believe in yourself, just don't underestimate yourself, because that's what I did many times. And I know I'm not going to do that. I cannot do this. I cannot do that. It wasn't so much other people telling me, but me, myself, for whatever background, whatever prejudice I have myself, saying that. So I should say, like, no, believe in yourself and do whatever you think will be the best, and just take your pathway that you want.
Okay. Judge Waxberg, would you mind going next? And then we'll go to Judge Friedewitzer and then back to Val.
Got to find the unmute button here. I did not know any lawyers when I went to law school. I mean, literally, I did not know any lawyers. I think law school is a little bit more, I don't know what the word is. It's a little bit more accepting, or it's open more to students than it was when I went. When I went, like, I never spoke to a professor. I mean, maybe I did in my third year when I had a clinic, but otherwise, like, you just didn't, first year, never talked to a teacher. And in retrospect, I wish I had spoken to people and gotten a better sense of what, like, I didn't know that doing a clerkship was a thing. I didn't know that writing for a journal was a thing. I didn't know any of that. And had I known, maybe I would, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have, but maybe I would have applied for some of those things. So I think, my advice is talk to your teachers, talk to your professors, and if you know people who are lawyers, talk to them and find out what do they like about their job, what don't they like about their job, and what are the things that speak to you. So,
Judge Friedewitzer, what would you tell your baby lawyer self if you had the chance?
So what I would say is that the one thing that I found out when I was in law school and that I was working, like, in the summer, was that law school is great, a great place to learn, but when you're leaving, everyone's looking for practical experience. And I don't think that I really, since I had an idea of what I wanted to do, I don't think that I went that direct route. And I think that now they have many more clinics, from what I understand, that give you more experience. I know, because sometimes the law schools do appear in front of us. And I think that I would tell myself that if I knew which direction I would want to go, that I would start, especially with the clinic that, worked with in the area that you want to work in, so that you get the practical experience. I think that what I've seen when you come out of law school is that if you want to be a personal injury lawyer, they're looking for someone who knows how to prepare the papers. And that I think that would give you an edge when you're out there looking for work, to be able to say, I know how to file papers. I know how to prepare the original documents for things that I want to do. If you're interested in family law, I think it's really important to spend time in family court. I think that the courts are all different and they're all very specialized. And when you have the experience in those courts, it raises you above somebody else who's coming in and does not have that experience. So if you don't know which branch of law that you're interested in, which is fine, then I would go to different ones and experience them and see which interested you. But I can tell you that for me, I thought I'm in law school and this is great, and I'm learning all of these things, but at the end, when you come out, it's a very different place than where you are now. And people are looking for, if you looked at a law journal at all and you looked at, some of the want ads, you'll see that they're looking for a certain amount of experience. And of course, how do you get that experience unless you're working at it? But I also think that the clinics are very helpful, the ones that give you practical experience. And so if I could go back, I pretty much learned it step by step. And I know before I ever was assigned as an attorney for a child, I had to go through a lot of training to do it, because the family court is just a very different place than every other place. And they're all unique, but you have to really learn how to maneuver through those processes. So that's exactly what I would tell myself.
And how about you, Val? What would you tell your baby self?
So I think really, I think it's true. Like you come out of law school and you're like, all right, great. Now what? And you don't really, it's really hard. And I think I would advise anyone, if you're not, that a job working for the city or the state to begin is a really great place to start. You get a lot of experience. I mean, you start and you're trying your own cases in a couple weeks. It's pretty unique in that sense. And you really do get the opportunity to prepare your own case. You learn how to do everything immediately because no one's there to help you do it. And you figure it out, and it forces you to, you learn a lot, you get some great experience. And then after you put the time in, you do have a lot more opportunities than you would have after only a few short years of having worked for the city or for the state in whatever field it is you're looking at. I think those jobs, people write them off a lot when they're in law school and no one wants to do it, but I think it gives you a lot of training and a lot of expertise that you can't get anywhere else. And I think it can be really helpful.
I do agree with that. Having worked at ACS as well, you definitely learn some great trial skills where I don't think I would have gotten that training in the first place.
Yeah. And you're also working with a lot of people that are your age, and you work together and you learn a lot from each other, and it's a very supportive environment, I think.
Okay, thank you. So I know what we're going to do now is we're going to transition to kind of the day-to-day court cases. I know we have two of our judges have backgrounds as attorneys for children, actually in two very different capacities. And I think maybe if you don't mind, if we can start with Judge Friedewitzer, what do you see as the role of the attorney for the child in your day-to-day proceedings?
So it's really one of the most important, because although the role has changed significantly over time, the role of an attorney for a child is really to let me know what the child is thinking and feeling and how it looks from the child's perspective. So unfortunately, most of the cases when the two parents are arguing with each other, they don't always accurately reflect what's going on in the relationship between the child and the other parent. And I find that it's very, very important and vital to know what the child is thinking and feeling, and that it be represented to me by that attorney, and that the child is aware that, and that the parents are aware that you really can't get in the middle of the relationship between the child and his or her attorney, because it's a very special one, and it makes, in my opinion, it makes the child understand that the child is being heard, but also can relate to the child, that the child is not shouldering the responsibility of what happens in the case. So I often say to parents that just because this is what your child is saying doesn't necessarily mean that this is what's going to happen. I'm going to make that determination, but I want to know. And very often it's important in safety issues. There's one parent that might allege that the child is in danger with the other one. Very often each parent says the child lives with them, when in fact the child has lived, not according to the parents. The truth is, it depends on the age of the child, and obviously the older the child is, it's easier to relate to his or her attorney what, I hate to say what the requests are, because very often we receive reports where someone's asked the child, what do you want to do? Who do you want to live with? And that's not really the question that I want to know. I really just want to know how they're comfortable, how they're feeling, and what their perspective is, understanding that they're not going to shoulder the responsibility of what the final decision is. So I think for me, it's a unique opportunity to hear from the child where I wouldn't have known that information before.
So Judge Waxberg, what in your experience do you find makes a good attorney for the child?
Oh,
What
wow.
qualities make a good AFC?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I often find that you know, these cases are so fraught and full of tension and a lot of times anger. So it often helps when the attorney for the child is a calm person, but is also able to say very clearly what the child's wishes are, and also to work with the parents and their attorneys and trying to resolve the matter. I mean, it's almost always in the child's interest if the parents can resolve it without a trial, because a trial is just really, I mean, sometimes you have to have it, but a lot of the time it's just an opportunity for each parent to say how much they hate the other parent and all the terrible things they did. And all that does is create even more bad feelings between the parents and more stress for the child. So, you know, the attorneys for the children who can sort of explain to the parents in a way that they can hear it. For example, if a child has been living with one parent for their whole life and doesn't want to leave that parent, but still wants to, you know, spend time with the other parent, for an attorney for the child who can explain that to a parent in a way that they can hear, is very helpful.
Thank you, Judge Waxberg. So I wanted to move on. I feel like this is a game show. I wanted to move on to the subject of SIDGs. And I'm wondering, Judge Vargas, if you could tell us a little bit about SIDG cases here in family court, and whether you enjoy doing them or not.
Yes, so to put in perspective also what Judge Fieldwood and Judge Waxberg were talking about, remember that in family court, our task is to do what is in the best interest of the child. That's the standard for the family court cases. And one of those things that I do is called the special immigrant juvenile status cases. And those are children who come from other parts of the world that are abandoned, neglected, abused, or some other similar situation. And they come to the United States and they're living with their uncle or their brother or the mother or the father. So they have to establish that at least one parent have abused and neglected them from over there in the country of origin. So they usually come to court via a guardianship or a custody proceeding, where that uncle or that mother is seeking custody so that they can go with that custody order to the immigration court for them to get status for the children, residential status. So they have to establish those things. They come to court, and I swear them in, and there's like an inquest usually, because the other parent usually doesn't come, or the parent have abandoned the child. And so then I issue findings. There have to be five specific findings. One, that the child is unmarried, that is under 21 years of age, that it is not in their best interest to be returned to the country of origin, and that, what is it? That in essence, it is not, they don't have anybody else with whom they can go back to their country of origin, that it will be dangerous for them to be there. So I made those findings, and then they go with that order to the immigration court so they can get the residential status. I love those cases. Those are the ones that I prefer in family court, because they usually end up with a good result, with a child that can stay here in the United States and that is safe from any harm from in the country of origin. So I love them, yes. And we have people from Israel, from Africa, from Iran, from Russia, from Jamaica, from Haiti. I mean, it's wonderful to see India. It's wonderful to see all these children from all over the world.
Thank you. I was muted. Are there any other oh, Judge Waxberg, yes.
I'm raising my hand. I can't find
Yeah.
the hand thing. No, I just wanted to add to what Judge Vargas said, because so much of what we do in these custody and visitation cases are, parents who are fighting with each other, or even orders of protection, like horrible things within families. And it's so often in the SIDGE cases that you're feeling so good because it's somebody in the child's family that stepped up and is taking care of them in a way, and it's often someone who has no legal requirement to do so. It could be an older brother or an aunt or a cousin, and they've taken this child in and have given them a really safe home. And so it's actually a really wonderful feeling when you're doing those cases and you see that.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm going to switch gears again. I'm going to direct this to Val, because I believe Val had actually mentioned that she had a background working with ACS. And so in cases involving domestic violence, as a jurist, what do you tend to look for when you're determining parenting time schedules?
So I think the first thing, if it's appropriate for, if there's been domestic violence, either there's an order of protection or there's, been an ACS case and there's findings and that the family is dealing with a domestic violence issue. If you feel that visitation is appropriate, the most important thing is setting up pickup and drop off times, I think, that keep everyone safe. You need to make sure that the victim is safe, that there's a way to facilitate, if appropriate, a relationship with the child and the other parent. And it's very difficult right now because I didn't particularly like precinct pickup and drop offs before COVID. I hate them now because you're basically just putting a kid in a room of first response. I mean, it's a nightmare. So we're trying to find all sorts of different ways now to facilitate pickup and drop off that are both safe, like for the victim, and safe for COVID, which has been difficult. And I think it's really, you have to keep monitoring those cases as they go, because people, with issues of domestic violence, a visitation order is a very easy way to manipulate your victim. And so you always have to be looking at that order and constantly revisiting whether or not that visitation is appropriate. And those cases are very, very difficult. I mean, it's wonderful to have an attorney for the child on those cases. It's really difficult when they're young and you don't have one, but you really need to listen to what's going on and make sure that the child feels comfortable, make sure that the parents feel comfortable. But I think safety, physical safety and COVID safety right now are the two biggest issues I'm having in those cases.
Thank you. Now, Judge Friedewitzer, what would you consider to be the role of like a supervised parenting time in domestic violence cases? And how often?
Of the supervisor, or
and the reports of the supervised parenting time, and how do you use the reports that are often generated at the end of those visits?
So the role of the supervised visitation personnel, whether it's a social worker or it's in a group, is extremely important, because very often when there are allegations of domestic violence, we don't know whether or not they're actual or factual or not necessarily as correct as people are alleging. And very often that is what someone says, you know, I'm afraid and I would like the visitation to be supervised. We have to err on the side of caution because we do not want the children to be harmed in any manner. So they're very important because, as strange as it sounds, there are people who don't behave correctly in front of the supervisors, and and the reports are extremely important because we do hear about them. Most people are very well behaved during the supervised time. Sometimes it gives people a transition during those supervised visits where they're able to feel more comfortable. If children have witnessed domestic violence, it gives them an opportunity to see their other parent in a different light and see whether or not they can be comfortable. Very often there are parents who say, you know, I don't want anything to do with that other party, but that person's okay with the children. But I think the reports are extremely important. They really go into detail about what one parent did with that child or children and how they spoke with them and what they focused on, and also the reaction of the child to that parent, whether the child was afraid to go in the room, whether the child transitions very easily from one parent to the other. Those are a lot of telling signs as to whether or not it's, whether or not it's necessary for that supervised visitation. Because not that we ever want domestic violence, but we always hope that if there is, it's never been in front of the children have never been exposed to it. So then you can have a relationship with each party without that. And very often that is what I find, that we get a report and the report says that, you know, the child was comfortable. It seemed like a comfortable situation. They were comfortable with that parent. They're willing to have. They transitioned well from one parent to the other. The parent respected the rules. The parent wasn't, you know, quizzing the child. The supervisor did not have to. I think very often children are very comforted by having a supervisor in the room so that they can feel safe as well and protected as well, especially children who are afraid to have a visitation, just knowing that someone will be there to make sure nothing happens to them. So I find it to be very valuable. As I said, I very often err on the side of the supervisor. If it can't be another adult in the family, which would be better for the children, then a social worker would be great. It's not a great environment and it's a weird environment to be in, but a very telling one, I find most of the time. And then the best part of it is to be able to transition, meaning start to have some time that's not supervised, but begun and followed up with the supervisor so that the child will be able to say whether or not the behavior that began continued throughout the time that the person wasn't supervised, and then have the ability to tell the supervisor after, you know, it was okay, it went well, and I would like to continue or not continue.
Thank you. And does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to the use of supervised visitation reports? Okay. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to Judge Waxberg. And would you mind talking a little bit about forensic evaluations for the students, and like what type of cases do you like to order them in? And then what type of cases do you find them to be unnecessary?
So a forensic evaluation is done by a psychologist, and they are doing a very, very intense look at both the parents and the parents' relationship with the child. So they will interview both parents, you know, for several, you know, not just one meeting, several meetings. They will talk to what called collateral sources. So, you know, if the mother is saying, for example, oh, there was a lot of domestic violence and my sister was there for a lot of it, they might, you know, you can talk to her, they might talk to that person, or they might talk to grandparents to hear more about how the parenting goes. And then they will also see the child with the parent. And if the child is old enough, they will talk to the child, or they will see how the child is with the parent. in a situation. And then they will write up a report. And actually, some of them make recommendations and some of them don't. And judges have different feelings about whether they want a recommendation or not. But they will certainly write a very detailed report about what they've observed. So obviously, it's a very, very long and intense process. So it will extend a case out for a long time. But there are cases that clearly need it. I mean, if there are allegations of mental illness, then clearly you want to have a forensic report. Often there are allegations of what used to be called parental alienation. They don't like to call it that anymore. It's now called reject and refuse and reject, something like that, where a child is refusing to see a parent. So that will also, you know, if it seems like that's happening, a lot of times we will ask for a forensic in that case. Also, sometimes with domestic violence, it's useful to have a forensic because domestic violence can end up, the victim of domestic violence can end up with a lot of issues that some of them are flowing directly from the violence they've experienced, but it may look like something else. So it's often useful to get a forensic in that situation. If there's nothing unusual about the case, then I don't order forensic. Sometimes lawyers will ask for it because they think it will help settle the case, which sometimes is true. But again, it is a delaying, it is a delay in the case. So I would usually order it only if it seems like there's a underlying need for it in the case.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add? It's hard for me to see if there's hands raised.
I think that also with drug abuse and alcohol abuse, those are also situations when we do the forensics. Yeah.
Thank you. So Judge Vargas, I know I'm gonna ask you the next question. What do you when it comes to contempt? Okay, what do you think are the pros and cons of attorneys or litigants filing for contempt in family court, given the available remedies?
Yes, so contempt you have to have a very high burden in establishing contempt of a party. You have to have had shown a pattern of not complying with an order. You have to show that it is willful. It's a willful violation of the court. You have to show what are the remedies that you want. I tend not to. I mean, of course, there are cases that that need that finding of contempt, but there has to be a hearing. You cannot just do it like off the cuff. You have to have a full hearing that the parties can present both their views and whatever excuse they have for not complying with the order. They have to establish that the order, what they received the order, they read the order, they understood the order. So it's a very high burden to establish contempt. And once you establish it, then what are you gonna do? Are you gonna incarcerate a parent for not complying with the order? Are you gonna incarcerate a child for not complying with the order if it was a visitation order and the child didn't wanna go? It's very hard to do a contempt in family court proceedings because of those reasons. So I try to settle those cases, or at least, you know, make up visitation or do some other, trying to get other remedies to so the aggrieved party is not as damaged.
Thank you. I'm going to move on I'm going to go back to Val. How do you believe that the pandemic has impacted proceedings? Like, how do you see how the proceedings have changed? I think we're going to get close to finishing up because everyone has to go back to do cases at 2 o'clock.
So I think there's, besides that, there's nothing good about the pandemic. The great thing that has happened is virtual proceedings. I get so many more litigants actually appearing because it's easy. Additionally, they are not missing a day of work, a day of school, a day of whatever. They're able to pop in, do their case. They're not sitting around waiting all day. For them, it's amazing. I mean, look, sometimes people push it a little bit, and I had someone actually appearing the other day as she was checking people out at a register, but she didn't miss a day of work. You know, I mean, she didn't have to like run late to pick up her kids from school because she was stuck because everyone got delayed. So I think for the litigants, it has been phenomenal. They show up more. They are able to show up. It's not messing up their entire life. I mean, we used to have people that they would lose their jobs because they would miss too many days of work having to show up here. And that's not good for anyone. And it's certainly not in the best interest of the child for a parent to lose their job. So I would like, I mean, not trials, because virtual trials are terrible, but for conferences, I think this is something that we should absolutely incorporate going forward. It is so much better for the parents, for the kids. We don't have to worry about a bunch of kids, you know, mixing in the nursery right now because their parents didn't have childcare arrangements. And there's less people in the building if you don't have people here for conferences. So overall, I hope we are permitted to continue doing virtual conferences, because I think in terms of the impact on the litigants' lives, it greatly reduces the stress that court adds to their lives. And I hope that we can continue to do that for them.
Thank you. And I think the last question really is going to be, this is for everyone, and we can go in whatever order you want. What's your favorite thing about being in family court? Anybody want to raise their hand, or do I pick?
I'll say it quick because I know I have to go.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the people that work here are phenomenal. Everyone. I love everyone that works here. I love the lawyers that work here. I remember my judge used to say to me when I first started working for her, with family court, you're either in it for a minute or you're in it for life. You know, you start and you realize it's not for you and you leave, or you stay here because you really love working here. And I think the people with which we work really care about the families and the kids that we're working with. And I think it's a phenomenal place to work, and it's a great group of lawyers. Everybody, for the most part, has a great sense of humor, and it's a very wonderful group of people to work with in terms of the lawyers and the jurists and everybody in the building. I consider myself very lucky to be able to work here.
Judge Friedowitzer, then we'll do Judge Waxberg and then Judge Vargas. How about that?
So I am going to agree with Referee Waldheyer. It's a family in and of itself. I think my favorite part is when you see two parents who are able to overcome and realize that the most important part in the whole case is the child or the children, and really realize how affected they're going to be by the continuing of the fighting and the arguing, and come to realize that they have to stop and put their children first to make sure that their children grow up healthy and well, and without being stigmatized, and without continuing in a situation that's painful. So for me, you know, when they come to that realization, whether they have little nudges or help, or they just see what it's doing to themselves and their family, I think that's, for me, you know, my favorite. Plus, I agree with you, we work with incredible people, from the clerks and the court officers. I think the thing about family court is, even if you're a judge, you can't do this by yourself. You can only do this if you have the court officer helping you, the clerk helping you, the court attorney. So every person plays such a valuable part in this process. And without everyone together, it just wouldn't work. And so we really all have to collaborate with each other in order to have anything positive, or have success, or have a really good turnout. So for me, I think that's it. And okay.
Thank you. Judge Waxberg.
Yeah, well, I'll just, you know, people come to family court because they're in pain, usually. It's, you know, there's something terrible happening in their family. And that's why they're here. And so when you can help them resolve that and move to a better place, it's incredibly rewarding. So there's, much of this work is just incredibly, incredibly rewarding every day.
Thank you. And Judge Vargas, you get the last word.
Yes, and I agree with both Judge Friedewitz and Judge Waxberg. For me, the most important is to be able to have that child be happy, have that child have visitation right away, have that child has a good parent that can take care of him or her. I think the immediacy of my orders, if they comply with them, that helps a family right away, and a child that's able to visit with the father or with the mother. I think that's the most rewarding thing for me, that they can tell me afterwards, oh, Judge, thank you so much. I saw my child and it was great. I think that's it. That's the most important thing for me.
Thank you. I'm going to turn this back to Hyatt.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And to my students, Judge Vargas was actually the first judge I ever argued in front of in housing court in the Bronx. So it's a bittersweet circle to bring it back to the first place I practiced when I worked for the Legal Aid Society. And so, I thank you all so much for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. And thank you, Jamie, for moderating and for your wonderful questions.
Thank you, Hyatt.
I wish you all the best of luck. I really do. I wish you all the best of luck. It's a fun time in your life, that's for sure. I have a trial, so I have to go, but thank you so much. Good luck, everyone.
Good luck, everyone.
Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.
Good luck. A pleasure meeting you.
Okay, I think we're just leaving you, and unless anyone has any questions that I can answer, I will leave you guys be. Okay.
Does anyone have questions for Jamie?
Maybe I have questions. I'm a court attorney, so, and I think, did Sasha left, right?
Yeah,
Sasha
she hopped off.
So,
Yeah, she just hopped off, yeah.
Yeah, but if you guys have any questions about that, I'd be happy to talk to you about, even about that process.
I actually have a question. I'm sorry,
sure.
I'm having difficulty finding the hand raise function.
Okay.
But two of the lawyers spoke about SIDG cases, and I was just wondering if you have seen any particular pushback at guardianship hearings where the potential guardian also lacks a residential status, or that was
No, we haven't. Actually, the judges, and it's interesting because both Judge Waxberg and Judge Vargas love doing SIDG cases, which is why I directed those questions to them. Generally, if they're going to apply, they've already essentially been, I want to say, sorted out by a legal program that's going to pick a proper guardian. Like, people don't usually do SIDG cases on their own. They don't kind of roll in and do these pro se, right? There's a lot of different organizations, particularly in New York City, that will act as an attorney for the child. They'll come in, they'll pick up the child, they file on behalf of the child, and they'll often end up representing both the child and essentially the guardian at the same time. So typically they're already prepared, the paperwork's done. They even generate the orders for us. So, I mean, really all SIDGs do is they kind of give you a ticket to take to immigration, right? It's a finding that the kid has nobody else to take care of them here in the United States. I mean, interestingly, immigration status is not a burden to whether you can file in family court, right? It's never, so we don't ask for status. They don't check status. You can roll in as long as you meet the residency or domicile requirements in New York State. We're your jurisdiction, no matter what your status is. So any undocumented individual can apply for custody, and they can be granted a custody order. They can even use the child support services here. They can use a support collection unit and have their monies, distributed through the New York State child support collection unit system. So I hope that answers your question. Okay.
I think that it's often confusing, especially with SIDG cases, because you have the family court component and the immigration component. So it seems a little confusing of how can they get immigration status, because they're getting relief through someone in some sense that has no status, but they're very much separate, because it's the family court deciding that this person can be a guardian or can have custody of the juvenile. And so the family court applies the same standards, the same case law that they would in a custody case when determining best interests. And in that is that they can't look to a parent's immigration status, that, you know, and so that's why with such cases, that standard continues to apply for that component. And then when they apply through immigration, that's a totally different type of agency that looks at the relief. But that's why, as you can recall, when we talked about SIDG a couple of weeks ago, they can't petition for that parent. So like the parent that neglected or abused them to get immigration status through them. So there is that like type of a barrier to some extent. And so the courts, and, you know, they speak together to some extent in just that regard. But that's the only, you know, the time that it applies.
Interestingly, we recently had a case where the mother filed for SIDG with actually a pro se attorney from a big law firm, and they made service on the father, and the father showed up to the proceeding and actually said that he had been looking for the mother for the last 5 or 6 years. But the problem was the child was already currently in deportation proceedings. And the way actually we resolved this is because the judge wanted the child to have the SIDG finding such that she could bring that SIDG order to the immigration court. She actually issued the SIDG findings under one docket and then issued an order of custody and parenting time under a different docket number. Because when you really break down the proceedings, they're actually completely contrary to each other, in that you're finding that a parent has neglected or abused or abandoned a child. Meanwhile, in order to issue custody or visitation order, you need to find that that order is in the child's best interest. So it kind of is it's a little wonky, but it was a good way to resolve it, because of course the judges want to see children have status, and they don't want to see children taken from their homes. Is there any other questions, y'all? All right, looks good. Everybody enjoy, and Hyatt's great, so please be nice.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining, and
okay, everybody.
And for moderating.
Okay.
And for you all to know, Jamie and I used to work together at NILAG, so the organization I just came to Albany Law from. Many years ago now at this point. We sat across.
Like 3 years, yeah. All right, everybody, good luck. Take care. Bye.
Bye. So Alexandria, I'm not sure if you want to stop recording now.
Press stop recording, but it still has that recording.
It's all good. I mean, I just.
So Professor Barrett, it looks like you're actually recording also.
Oh, that's fine.
So I'll do stop.